Hi. I just want to tell you I'm very grateful and honored to be here today. There was a lot of people in my life that told me I'd never be here. You see, I'm convicted 25 times over of substance use disorder convictions. I'm also a high school dropout. But I'm also a lot of other things today. And that's what we're here to talk about. Philosophers have said, momentum first requires expending 10 units of energy to yield 1 unit of results. After a while, your momentum begins to build on itself, and it creates 10 units of results with 1 unit of energy. This principle works both ways, unfortunately. I'm going to talk about criminal justice reform, substance use disorder, and the impacts on recovery on a nationwide scale. I'm going to talk about my personal anecdotal experience with this, and then I'm going to back up to a 30,000-foot view and address it as a societal issue. This issue is now the #1 public health crisis and criminal justice issue in the country. It is the #1 killer of young people. And last year alone, it took the lives of over 64,000 young Americans. I share my story to show others that nothing is impossible to a willing heart, even with the deck stacked against you. I share it for the guy still sitting in the 8x8 cell who doesn't think that he has a chance of ever making a life, of ever being anything. I share my story because there's 30 million people in this country suffering from substance use disorder. It affects everything around us, whether we know about it or not. I'm here to tell the fellow substance use disorder sufferer that you're not a bad person trying to get good. You're a sick person trying to get well. The labeling theory in sociology and criminology tells us that if society tells someone they are something long enough, they start to think that way and behave accordingly. We're creating a new momentum here. We're going to love you until you can learn to love yourself. My journey should not be the exception, it should be the rule. I started using chemicals very young. My father was killed in a boating accident when I was 8 weeks old. And what studies have shown is that there's a large correlation between childhood trauma and substance use disorder. I also mentioned I started using very young. There's also huge correlations between the younger someone starts using substances and their chances of developing addiction. I started getting in trouble at a very young age. I was arrested and convicted as an adult at 16 years old. From there, things began to spiral out of control. I knew from the very first time I ingested chemicals that I wasn't like other people. I didn't handle it the same way my friends did, yet I still wanted to try to fit in. I chased that to a lot of damaging consequences. Once you have a record in the criminal justice system, it's very hard to get out of that trap. You begin to get wrapped up in arrests, probation, fees, fines. It all builds on itself in a cyclical nature until you can't get out. I'm going to tell a story about a time I was locked up in a metro Atlanta jail. I had been given 6 months for a public drunk. I was going through what the medical community knows as DTs, delirium tremens. I was pepper sprayed, stripped, beaten, and thrown into solitary confinement, also known as the hole, to shake it out. I should have been taken to the hospital and given medical treatment. To stop this momentum, it took me completely leaving Atlanta and coming over to Mississippi. My great-grandmother was from Horton, Mississippi, and there was an abandoned house there that my grandmother let me move into with practically nothing. I came over with a garbage bag full of clothes and a television set. I didn't have any heat the first winter. But I was able to enroll in a community college, and I found some people that took me in. They gave me a chance at an education. Then I met some more men who showed me what recovery was and had stories similar to mine. They too loved me until I could learn to love myself. I found that I could strive in academia. I earned a 4.0. I made the president's list every semester. I was fortunate enough to receive a Lucky Day scholarship to the University of Mississippi. It's for indigent individuals. They give about 25 out in the state every year. I was able to go to undergrad on a full ride. I also was able to get into the honors college here at Ole Miss. Now, granted, I'm 30 years old, and I was speaking with someone from the honors college, and I told him, he said, "You should try out for the honors college." I said, "Man, I'm a high school dropout. I could never do that." He said, "You should try." So I tried, and I made it. I also failed to mention, shortly before that, my best friend died of a heroin overdose. His 3-year-old and his 5-year-old found him. I made a decision while in the honors college to not be silent about my recovery anymore. So I decided to write my honors thesis on rehabilitation versus incarceration for nonviolent substance use offenders. And it took back the administration a little bit. Nobody had really talked about this before here, especially in the honors college. But I decided to be open because I was afraid of what might happen if I didn't. I graduated magna cum laude from the honors college, Phi Beta Kappa, top of my class. I went to law school to try and pay back into a system that was such a big part of my life. While in law school, I had many opportunities. I was appointed to the governor's opiate task force here in Mississippi with the Mississippi Bureau of Narcotics. I received an internship to one of the top criminal defense programs in the Bronx that specializes in holistic criminal defense approaches. And I was also published in one of the top criminal law journals in the country on these concepts that I'm sharing with you today. We've not always done things this way. Before 1970, the longest sentence anyone ever served for a drug crime was 1 year. We had the Controlled Substances Act come into effect in 1970 for a lot of different reasons that I can't go into right now, but the ramifications have been huge. Since then, drug possession has become a felony. 5%, we now incarcerate over 25% of the world's prison population, while the United States only makes up 5% of the world's population. This is up 700% in 40 years. Over 80% of the people behind bars suffer from substance use disorder or other co-occurring disorders. 60% of the people that are released wind up reoffending within 3 years. Most of these people aren't rearrested for new arrest. They're technical violations. And what I mean by technical violations is a failed urine screen, failure to pay, failure to be somewhere because you don't have a driver's license or have money to get there. They're not going out, most of these individuals are not going out and committing new crimes. And like I said, 30 million people in this country suffer from substance use disorder. Yet only 1 out of 10 people suffering ever receive any kind of treatment. The shame, the stigma, and the criminalization of this disorder keeps people silent, even in recovery, when they've gotten back some of the things in their life that they hold so dear now. John was one of the main reasons I decided to break my silence. So what do we do? What do we do? That's what we tried to figure out with the RCO model, which is a recovery community organization. We created Southern Recovery Advocacy here in Oxford, Mississippi. And it addresses the collateral consequences of the criminal justice system with drug offenses. And let me explain what collateral consequences are. Many people serve sentences long beyond the time they ever spend behind bars. Long after their probation is finished, long after they've paid their fines. They now have a label that keeps them from participating in life. It keeps them from getting Pell Grants and education. It keeps them from getting housing, and it keeps them from getting jobs. So with the RCO, we decided to proactively tackle these collateral consequences. and we based our model on several pillars. We try to hook people up with employment. We try to advocate for education, employment, housing, life skills, and recovery. Access to these tools that are so essential to people reintegrating back into society. I didn't have some of these life skills when I came out. I didn't know how to build credit. I had to be taught these things. And it was people in recovery that were able to do that for me. The tough on drug use policy is not working. It's a tool of political manipulation. It's a business. It keeps us afraid of what we don't understand. It's been my experience that the tough people, the really tough people, help people up when they're down. They don't kick them. Trust me, I'm surrounded by some of the toughest people on the planet. They are the pillars of their respective recovery communities, and restorative justice is their specialty. Some of them are here tonight. Portugal and other countries have discovered that this is not a criminal justice issue, this is a social issue. Portugal decided to decriminalize all drugs in 2001. And let me explain what I mean by decriminalize. It's different from legalization. I'm not suggesting we need to put black tar heroin next to Marlboro cigarettes at the 7-Eleven. What I'm saying is we need to quit attaching criminal penalties to a social and mental disorder, thereby compounding the social problems and the expense in the long run. Since Portugal decriminalized, their death rates, their crime rates, and their addiction rates have plummeted because they're now treating it as a social issue. Other countries are now following suit: Norway, Uruguay, Sweden. The United States has the highest rates of addiction on the planet, which also puts us in a unique position. We have an opportunity to see the highest rates of recovery in history. I was fortunate enough to be able to visit California about a month ago, and I went out outside of Berkeley and San Francisco, and I was able to go into a redwoods forest. And as I looked around this redwoods forest, I noticed something. Redwoods don't grow by themselves. You never see a redwood out in the middle of a field growing. These are some of the most beautiful specimens I've ever seen. 20 feet in diameter, 300 feet tall. Splendid works of creation. But why the redwood grows in groves and not alone is because their root systems interlock. And the redwoods showed me that it's almost identical to how we do things in recovery. We don't get sober on our own. We help each other. Our root systems interlock, and we hold each other up so that we can reach great heights of success. We don't need a war on drugs. We need a war on intolerance. We need a war on closed-mindedness. And we need a war on archaic, substandard policies that are economically irresponsible and ineffective. Thank you for my life.